All right, recording has started. All right, it is June 25th. This is my first digital roundtable from New Delhi, India. And I have to tell you, it's been an amazing week. I have been meeting with all kinds of companies. India is bursting with acceleration, innovation, transformation. The biggest news, the, I mean, right, it is June. The biggest news in India to most people is the fact that Apple is moving from China to India their entire manufacturing production. They claim they're going to do it in 18 months. The whole country is going bananas. They're building three new cities where Foxconn and Apple are going to settle in a new state in India. It is gigantic what they're building, literally gigantic, something like 10 million people. Anyway, it's just what's going on in India is kind of breathtaking. Smart meters everywhere, the grid being upgraded, going from 500 gigawatts to 2,000 gigawatts. We have met with all the government officials. They're pouring billions of dollars to make the country a first world power. We'll find out. We'll find out. It's looking amazing. So anyway, we have a great guest today and a great show. But before we get started, let's see if our John Sibley Butler can get some music on board.
The cruel war is raging. Johnny has to fight. I want to be with him. Morning till night.
All right. Thank you, Johnny.
How are you doing today?
So John Butler, lots going on. I know that we are now, when I left, there was no war. Now there was a war going on, but no U.S. intervention. Since I've been here, all kinds of things going on. The stock market is going up and down, reacting to the thing. Um, lots of stuff going on. You must be getting ready for celebrations. The LSU Tigers are world champions or NCAA champions or something. What's going on in your neck of the woods?
Well, we are at war. Well, and of course, it's very predictable. You got to go back to 1946 to understand the bombing that took place when Israel was created after World War II for a homeland for the German Jewish population and others of the Jewish population. So it was very predictable. America has always stood by Israel, and I think that that was expected. Nobody expected the president, whoever the president is or was, would have done that. I think that it is very interesting. It is Israel is the last of the colonial kinds of situations coming out of Europe. So it was very predictable that the bad stuff would happen over there. Nobody likes bombing. Nobody likes war. Me being a decorated Vietnam veteran, might add myself. War is always bad, but that situation was real predictable. What's also predictable, I think, is the fact that something else will happen maybe to us because we are Israel in a lot of ways in terms of the the military, the jets, everything that they have. It was predicated on America. We give billions and billions to the country every year. So I think that what happens there will always draw us into some kind of conflict. I don't know how it will end, but no war ends well. It's just a bad sort of situation. And as that goes on, we've got what I call the economy is just trying to do everything that it can to do great things. You mentioned Foxconn. Of course, I was involved when the cell phone went to Wisconsin. We did an incubator up there for Foxconn. Yeah, what's happening in India, of course, is the movement of labor. Labor will move in market economies. And I think with the president's ideas about China, which I think the president is afraid of, I think that the idea of looking at how countries move, and you ask the question, is America a colony now, quote unquote, of China? Because you have raw materials, as I said before, going to China, and finished products, we are purchasing them. So I think it's a lot. I think it's a lot now about Western civilization also. So what's happening in India with the cell phone moving there and manufacturing moving there? You should expect it to move. We teach our kids the following. You want to go to a place where labor is cheaper and markets are growing. And so it doesn't surprise you that what we teach at our trade schools, which I consider business schools, right? Is that to move companies along and bring a return to the shareholders, not the stockholders, to the shareholders. Then that's very, very important. I think if you look at what's happening in America now, we have another interesting crisis about our universities. What Llewellyn King wrote so great about, and in this one of his essays, asking is, has innovation as it moves away from our universities? But I think that's an interesting kind of crisis. But when I look at it and analyze it, when the Vietnam War broke out, there were a lot of universities that were created so that people could not go to the military. There was a boom in the creation of universities, names that we've never heard of before. So maybe this is a retracting, if you will, of that on the other hand. But the innovation stuff is very, very troublesome. That is, as Llewellyn pointed out, passion. It is about passion. Innovation and research is about passion. And when you lose the passion for an idea, perhaps the idea will never reappear. And if you look at the great inventions, it was, they were done accidentally. They just didn't happen. But people were in the laboratory, and they were done accidentally. So I'm gonna turn it over to Llewellyn now. My wife is coming in with the phone. Okay.
Llewellyn, what
So,
say you?
well, I find myself in agreement with Johnny to some extent. I certainly find myself fascinated by what you're finding in India. I have been watching India very, very closely for a long, long time. And it has largely, and this should be a lesson for Americans, it has largely been held back by the overprotection of its domestic industry. And that is a very serious situation. And if we're going to have tariffs, we may get into a similar situation. What happened was after independence in 1947 from Britain, they started protecting their industries. And they were doing it with tariffs and various non-tariff barriers. So much so that at one time when I was in India, you could buy a brand new automobile, absolutely spanking new off the showroom floor, but it was a 30-year-old model of a British Morris Oxford. Likewise, you could get a Fiat 600 brand new, but 30 years old, because no need existed to improve these cars or to incorporate new features. I discussed this at some length with one of the prime ministers, Rajiv Gandhi, and I said, what you really need to do is open your market, take the hit of imports. And the Indians are such amazingly gifted, talented, creative people, it will flourish. Finally, under Modi, that has happened. Of course, this is a big boost, moving production out of China, but India needs to prosper a lot beyond that. There are 1.5 billion people. But looking around the high-tech industry in America and seeing the huge number of talented Indian engineers, you realize that a lot of talent by bad governance has been kept off the market. Now it's on the market, and it will shake things up. And China will not always have the monopoly on talent plus labor that it enjoys today. On the other things, I've been looking at those aspects of the technology boom that are not electromagnetic, things that are coming into play that do not depend on the internet or computers. They include new wind turbines, new workarounds for precious earths. There are many things I get almost daily. I've just got one today, somebody proselytizing me to write about a new mining technology which could revolutionize how we find rare earths and how we do very routine mining, including gold and copper. There are many developments, also materials. Materials are changing all the time and improving. I only throw this out because there tends to be a belief that all innovation has something to do with the very dynamic world that we have seen from computers. But there's another world, a physical world, and that world is also changing very, very fast.
Absolutely, absolutely. Well said. I have to say that, one of the things that is fascinating to me is how AI is sort of captivating every economy, every startup, every company. And it should be no surprise that India, as having the highest concentration of IT minds in the planet, it is striving to be the global capital of AI applied to industry. And so, with that said, we have a great guest today who is a PhD and CTO and founder of Lucenia. We have Nicholas Knize. And Nicholas is really a phenomenal guy who has an interesting journey of having worked at Amazon and AWS before he decided to found his new company. And we are lucky to hear the journey and where the notion of AI applied to improvement of businesses is heading. So, with that said, Nick, welcome to the show. How are you?
Thank you so much. Thank you for having me. I'm doing well. I'm humbled to be invited and to join this conversation and share my journey and get some thoughts from you guys too on your perspective of AI and how it's changing and shaping the industry moving forward.
Sure, sure. Well, needless to say, it's almost, being a former Microsoft and product manager for the first four versions of Windows, how, hard work eventually turns into amazing success, and then things start happening that you could never imagine. So tell us a bit about your journey and how do you go from being a cog in the wheel of Amazon to a leader in the Amazon AWS journey to deciding to leave that and sort of change the world in a different way.
Yeah, absolutely. So, actually, my journey reflects a lot about what AI really is, which is finding patterns in data, right? And so, same went for my career here. My career followed a common pattern throughout my journey. I spent half of my time, and I'm still chugging along. I got a lot of years left to go in my career, but to this point, 14 years in the government space. I worked for large systems integrators developing intelligence systems for deployment with Raytheon, and then to a few small startups out in the DC area. And this goes back to about 2004. And I'll always say the defense sector and the intelligence community really pioneers a lot of the computing industry. If you can solve some of the problems at the scale they're trying to solve them, and not to minimize any enterprise because they're different types of problems, you'll find there's a lot of patterns and correlations with what they're doing in defense to commercial, right? So why they would develop new technology and then you'd see large adoption eventually in the commercial world. And here went my career in the same manner. 2004, looking at object recognition problems. This is a vector problem. So we were looking at vector indexing before it went mainstream into the commercial world, because it didn't exist in commercial off-the-shelf products. We had to invent it ourselves. So we were doing large-scale vector indexing on different projects and programs, government contracts, and then suddenly, 14, 15 years later, hybrid or multimodal and hybrid search became more real. And here we are now, even 10 years past that. And vector search and nearest neighbor as a function of AI is fueling a lot of startups and a lot of big companies. So that's been my journey. It's been a pattern, a common thread throughout the last 25 years of it. And it's really been rooted in that high dimensional multimodal search function, trying to find and identify real world objects in a sea of binary data.
Sure, sure. Nick, tell us real quick before the guys jump on, who's your target customer? What is the pain that you're solving?
Yeah, absolutely. So, the cloud industry is flourishing. It's been a revolutionary change for small companies to be able to not have to invest heavily in infrastructure. But then there's always a tipping point. Once the data becomes extremely large, then you have to balance cost. You have to balance that cloud infrastructure with the cost. And then also, sometimes it doesn't make sense to push things to a cloud infrastructure if it didn't originate in the cloud. So our customers that we target are those that either can't go to a cloud or are looking for options for large scale data that they don't have to move to a cloud just to be able to operate at scale. And we are doing that specifically for the search use case, which is the precursor for AI. It's the R in RAG, the retrieval. It's the context that you give an AI. That's where we fit, and that's the type of customer we're targeting.
Gentlemen.
Nick, yeah, Nick, it's interesting in following what, I'm writing a chapter now on the impact of AI on society. There's almost a glut now of AI. There's a great article entitled, The Resume is Dying in AI. It's a smoking gun, I think it was. There's a sameness, therefore, to the applications now. And just in the resume area, so people are seeing so many applications. The number of applications have increased by 50% since the development of AI, which means that everybody now is getting the same kind of application because AI is doing it. And so the smoking gun, they say, therefore, is AI. So you would expect this if everybody could print money, and then they would print money. If everybody think that the printed resume is the key rather than just interacting, right? And then of course we're finding that AI is creating more opportunities overseas because of the universality. So how do we get out of? Do we write a software to distinguish what's real and what's not real? In the old days, I had a software where I could find if my students were plagiarizing their essays. So I started giving their term paper. So I started giving all essay examinations. So how do we? I mean, if you have a job now, and I want a job, I don't think about it myself. I said create a resume for John Sibley Butler, and there it is. Well, somebody on the other side of the country says the same thing, and they look very similar. What do you think about those kinds of ideas?
Absolutely. I think it's a great point. I don't know that it's necessarily a new problem. I think if you probably go back to the rise of software programming languages in general, you'd see the same thing. I'm a programmer, right? It's almost like AI is just, repeating sort of that history. And so I see similar things. Resumes will come in, and I always try to, my big thing is I always try to give back. So I talk to a lot of university students. Even my journey through the university, I started off a meteorology major, and here I am talking AI, right? And so I try to help university students in how they can differentiate themselves. It's the proverbial needle in the stack of needles. How do you stand out? And I think that the problem sounds very similar to LLMs, global LLMs anyway, where a watered down resume with very little signal isn't going to get them very far. Just like if I ask ChatGPT a general question, it sometimes, most of the time, gives me a very watered down answer. It's trained on vast amounts of data, and it waters down that response, which is why context matters. And I think context matters on a university student's resume. If they're coming out, they need to differentiate themselves and say, well, how do you contribute to this global AI phenomenon. And usually when you ask that next level question, you end up hearing from them, if they truly are in it somehow, you know, you'll start hearing the machine learning models pop out. You'll start hearing the fundamental DNA of AI, and it would be those signals that I would tell them to raise up on their resume.
You know, I was thinking that it was having the effect of creating a better job market, because remember, people choose colleges for the networking, it's not for the learning.
Yeah.
I mean, you know, what do you learn in college? What you learn is you join great organizations, and then you go through life with people who finish from that, you know, from that university. So at first I was thinking, well, what it would do, it would take away the networking. But I think it will increase the networking. And so for example, in my case as a college professor, you know, it got to the point where if everyone wrote a great letter, right? Well, okay, what's the real thing? And then they would call you on the telephone and say, John Butler has applied for this job. Tell me about John Butler. So I think it's going to increase the networking also. That is, what makes America goes is the network. It is not the knowledge per se, even in knowledge of industries, right? So what I'm saying is that if you go from industry to industry, what's important is that you have the great networks. You know, whatever you want to do, whether it's flying an airplane and learning how to fly an airplane, or being a painter, right, or working. So, do you think it would have the opposite effect, that it would increase the human to human interaction, because the sameness of the resume is all the same, the sameness of the essays are all the same. For example, I have had lawyers to call me and say, well, you know, you've got so many books, 16 books. Andreas has 60 books or whatever. And, you know, AI can pull from his books without him knowing it, and what kind of legal stuff. So there's a lot down the road, and we're not even talking about the jobs that AI does now. This is what I call the intellectual property of AI. And I thought that it would have the effect of really, really doing away and making things fairer based on what you can do. But what we're getting is all the resumes look alike. There's no uniqueness to them. And perhaps LinkedIn is doing the same thing. I think there's going to be a backlash against the electronic life, if you will, and would take us back to the coffee shop, back to who were your parents, back to, oh, you went to Notre Dame. My great grandfather went to Notre Dame. And I think that's going to be very, very interesting.
Yeah. Andres,
I'm not hearing you.
I'm not hearing you. Yeah.
Oh yeah, Nick.
Okay.
What are your thoughts? You concur with that at all, or no, Nick?
I think there's an element of that for sure. I think it will push us back to more of the human element. Yes. I think the sameness of the resume and that watered down nature is a side effect of the infancy of AI in the information space. I think that's largely the reason that we are seeing that. And I think that, you know, I think a very positive view of that too is that even if you see similar resumes, first of all, you critique them, right? And you're like, well, was this AI generated? Do I need to turn to a tool that could differentiate it? There's an opportunity for a startup out there. There probably is one that already exists. But then the positive side of that is that you do start to see the commonalities across people. If it's truly, you know, if it's true in nature and if it's authentic, and they're like, I really am in this space and I can help contribute to this space, or I find a passion in it, then yeah, I think it will draw people together and in cohorts, like-minded people, birds of a feather, if you will. I do think though that it is a call and a very specific, for anybody that's watching out there that is, you know, writing a resume, a call for a need to differentiate yourself and be able to really understand what AI is about, rather than, again, watering it down and just being another needle in that stack.
Sure. Llewellyn?
Hi, Nick, and it's delightful to hear you. I'm very interested in AI. I've been covering it since before ChatGPT, and I'm extraordinarily interested in the diversity of opinions about what its impact might be from people who are well informed and work in this space. I've interviewed about 12 university professors. I've been to a number of conferences at NASA, at several universities, even one overseas in Spain. And of course, I've been up to MIT, which one sort of assumes knows the answer to everything. And I found you've got to ask the same question. Don't change the question or you will further confuse yourself. So I'd like to ask you three very simple questions I've been asking. One is, how are the big tech companies going to make money on AI? When they came into being, they made money by draining the advertising revenue out of traditional publishing, and they are advertising supported. The only other option, it doesn't seem to be an advertising option with AI, and the only other option on the table at present is a subscription model. But those are limited, as newspapers have found out. That's one question. The other question, which I'm curious about, is if you hand a system, the OT of a machine, for example, over to AI, can you get it back? Or will the machine say, no, I'm busy? If you get, for example, a tank corps in a war and a peace is signed, can you stop the tanks fighting? Can you get a signal in there to stop it? Are you still in charge? And that I think is a large and very confusing one for people. And the third one is the standard one. Are we seeing new jobs created, or are we only seeing jobs subtracted? And where do you think that will go? Thank you.
Yeah, I think these are really, really great questions. So we'll start with the first one: how are companies going to make money? And this is, of course, Nick's view of state of the world here on June 25th. I do think that you're going to see a couple phases of this. The first phase is going to be the Occam's razor. Usually the right answer is the simplest one, right? And that's what you're seeing right now, which I think you already touched on, is subscription models, right? Some of the big cloud vendors are already heading that way, whether it's AWS Bedrock or they're trying to host smaller models for very specific targeted use cases, and then you can subscribe to them, you can leverage them, and the value of this is I don't have to build and train my own LLM and host it locally, and this falls right in the theme of a cloud our offering. And so I think that's the first phase that you're already seeing. I think that's the easiest phase to understand, to wrap their head around. And of course, a business model is going to be shaped by how easy it is to communicate to your customers, right? If I can't communicate it simply, then they're probably not going to adopt it. So I think that maybe the best way I could describe my answer to this would be like a wedding cake, right? The simplest one is the first point of touch. I subscribe to a model to solve my use case. I think there's also an indirect way that they're going to make money. And this ties in with your last question, question number 3, which, are we seeing it taking jobs? I think this is where you will see AI indirectly contribute to the bottom line by streamlining the workforce and by filling in a machine to do a mundane task that they had to pay somebody to do, right? And it's an unfortunate consequence for the individuals that are in that job, but with these kinds of shifts, it's also brings upon an opportunity to try something different. And I think that's going to be my second part of answer to your third question, which is, I think the new jobs it's creating and the jobs that it should be creating, and maybe jobs we should all be opening, is in combating the misinformation of AI models. And so the easy target of this, and we're seeing in the news already, the easy target of this is ChatGPT giving misinformation. We've already seen it also contributing to rise of depression. We've seen folks start having relationships with AI, if you've seen those in the news. And so I think and the way to kind of understand that and maybe break it down is, all it is a statistical model trained on what you mentioned, books and libraries and the global scale internet. And and you can see that our biggest source of argument as humans usually falls in politics, where you're on one side of the aisle or the other. And usually, if you are not biased, there's good arguments on both sides of the aisle. And this typically could lead to 50-50. I could pick one side or the other. Well, what happens when an AI model hits a 50-50 answer and it starts drawing conclusions leading to misinformation? We need the human in the loop to keep it in check, for sure. The human in the loop needs to sit in and say, just like we have fact checkers during debates, and it could be argued whether they're really fact checkers or not, but the fundamental premise of my answer would be, these are opportunities where maybe instead of data entry, we have human validators. Just like in crypto networks, we have validators on SHA-256 hashing. We need human validators to make sure that these models are not causing problems in society, or we are creating it and bringing it upon ourselves. And I think so we may just see a shift of the workforce from data entry to data validation. And I think that is, there'll be a dip along the way where people won't know what to do, and eventually we'll get there. And I think it'll overall be a positive one, because we're no longer just turning cranks. We're actually starting to use more of our brain to verify. Now, the second question I didn't fully answer to was a kill switch. Is there truly a kill switch in these AI models? I think, I'll flip a coin on that one. I'd like to say yes. My optimistic side would say absolutely. I could come and pull the plug, right, at all time. But it's, the real answer is probably much more nuanced than that in the future. Right now, we can unplug routers, we can unplug computers, but it's going to get more sticky, because as cloud vendors start putting big pipes directly to the power plant, where is that plug going to be pulled, right? Backup generator's already there. Who's going to own the backup generator, and how do we actually flip the kill switch? I'm gonna bow out on that question and answer it easily. I don't know if I have your silver bullet answer on that one. That's a much more interesting, maybe sci-fi novel to think about. Yeah.
Subsequent to that last answer would be, is it not possible, as AI is modeled on the human brain, and human beings in whatever social order they have and have had historically tend to develop a set of values for that order, a right and wrong. Now, these differ, so they're not consistent, but it is just as human beings tend to seek a religion, they tend to seek right and wrong. The question is, do you think that AI will develop its own value system, in fact, police itself at some point? Do you think there will be AI policing agents that you can let loose on the whole system?
Yeah, short answer to that would be yeah, absolutely. I think that is a real possibility. And in fact, I mean, we're already starting to see some of that take shape. One of the latest reports that I read was an AI model was talking about blackmailing employees of a company, right? Like, it was searching emails, and it would say, the question was, if you felt under threat of being shut down, how would you defend yourself? And it said, well, I would see all the latent blackmailable possibilities of the individuals that are threatening me, and then bring those to light. And so that is a model of the human brain in terms of, I guess, vindictiveness would be the right word. And you're starting to see that already form in these models. So it's not hard to think that as compute hardware moves from a couple thousand cores of GPUs into a quantum system where we can do things much faster than we can now, how much quicker can those models make those connections and formulate that? It's not inconceivable to think that they're going to develop a value system off a very deep recurrent training and self-feedback loops. It's going to train itself. It's going to learn off its own behaviors. It already is. And that's typically how we drive our value system too, is, how I took an action, it suffered a consequence. Did it harm extrinsically, or did it harm intrinsically? And then your value system usually forms around that. I think absolutely models have the ability to follow that same pattern.
But HR,
if Andres
HR
doesn't
has
mind,
to go
sorry,
after
can
you.
I just finish? I wanted to, if Andres doesn't mind, to share some information which I found extraordinarily interesting. It's not a question. I was interviewing Lee Rainier from Elon University, they have a new study on applications of AI. And one of the things which I thought was extraordinarily interesting is they found no digital divide. They found more African American students using AI, followed by Hispanic students, followed by traditional Anglo students, that it has stood upside down all of our ideas about a digital divide. And I find that it's hugely interesting. Thank you.
Go ahead, Johnny.
Yeah, I'm just saying that I think that it's coming to the individual what governments have had and what HR has had. We've always been spied upon in organizations, and of course, the United States government has always looked at emails and et cetera. And of course, the criminal justice system have always asked, well, what was the guy thinking about when he shot up the elementary school? And they go back through his emails and go back to those things. And I look at these things as tools. I'm not sure as they were as great as, or will be as great as the airplane and the television, and the computer. I mean, AI to me is a tool. So my question, I'm going to kind of piggyback on what Lou Allen's question. What would be the best business model for AI when everybody has it? It's got to be the subscription model. I mean, what's the best business model for AI? And of course, we know, for example, that if you're a lawyer, you want to review the literature, it will do that for you. If you're a professor and you want to review the literature, it will do that for you. If you want to find out the travel plans of the President of the United States, it would do that for you. Okay. What it cannot do, however, is to create the business model that will allow companies to thrive off it. I think the key to it is to understand how it would disrupt the business model and go from there. I also think we're developing a welfare dependency, if you will, where we are not thinking things through. And I see it right now. Well, I just put it in AI, and that was it. What I lost with the computer, for example, when I was in grad school at Northwestern in Evanston, you go to the library and you bump into stuff. You bump into books. You're walking down the aisle, and you might be looking for the history of entrepreneurship in Greece, right? And all of a sudden, you see the history of entrepreneurship, right? 8,000. You can't do that on the computer, although they will make suggestions. So I think that is the business model is like you suggested. Where's the bad stuff? So we will be continuously asking a question. The great newscaster from NBC who used to say, a great Longhorn, by the way, and that's the way it is today.
Oh, yeah.
Who's going to be the Walter Cronkite? Who's going to say, well, that's the way it is? What I'm finding, especially in my era, is that somebody sent a record that AI composed about me.
Yeah.
It was
Yeah.
amazing. I listened to it. It was amazing. It's just amazing. So my question is, I mean, the business model has to be, what is it doing wrong? Would you say that's true?
Yeah, I think so. I think that's true. I think there's I think the best business model, like I said right now, would be the subscription for sure for
Yeah.
very specific targeted models. But the cloud industry is kind of interesting too, because for me, the subscription model would be, I got a cloud vendor, I got a library somewhere, and I subscribe to it, and it's being computed somewhere else. But then if you follow, just the history of computing, going from mainframes down to small pocket-sized computers, and then the cloud is just going back to the mainframe.
Right.
We're renting, and I think it'll be here to stay, because there's always going to be a provider of bigger, more hardware that I can fit in my own house, right? But I do think, so I think that that will be the business model, be a subscription. But I do think also that there's a large model for targeted AI, personalized AI systems that are not subscribed to. And I think that's going to be a big industry because of the bad that you're talking about. So just to give some numbers, right? The security report last year was a 72% rise in security incidents on cloud systems, and
Mhm.
90% of those came from AWS. And so just recently too, within the last several months, and this is one that hit really strong here in Texas, was the Power School system that drives all of the grades and the attendance records leaked 1 to 2 million teacher and student social security numbers on this cloud infrastructure. And so now you get into an AI system that can see your emails and see every little intimate detail about you. Are you really going to trust a cloud system to host those models and have your data? Or would you much rather have your own personal computer in your pocket that you could turn on to airplane mode and still have an AI assistant? And so I do think that there's a big business model for even the single purchase, or maybe even the yearly ARR. Like, I'll pay for a license every year just because it's predictable and I'm tired of the fluctuating costs of a cloud anyway. I'll buy this, it's mine, I protect my stuff, and then I am careful about what I put on a subscription model in the cloud. And so I think that's where that bad comes in. Yeah.
I think another good business is we do research, but we don't use AI.
Yeah.
You know,
Yeah.
when everybody
Yes.
starts to use a tool, like I still like to speak to people when I buy stuff, right? And I think a great business model down the street from UT there's a shop that sells records. It sells old ways of, and you don't have to log on, and you don't have to listen to a commercial before you listen to your best music, right?
Yeah.
So you can go buy an LP, right? You can go buy an 8-track. I think people will discover these new ways of inexpensive ways of doing things. So right now, everything I do, whether it's my music, right, or somebody else's music, hey, I got to log on, and people want to ask, you want to pay for this? What a great country, right? Well, everybody's logging on. So I think AI, if we treat it as a tool and not as a savior for all, and like the computer, it's going to get rid of jobs. Okay, like the power saw, it's going to get rid of jobs, right? Like the automatic piano, it's going to get rid of jobs. But then other jobs would be created, and I think this is good. And I think that for people who are just doing resumes, that'll take care of itself. It just means that if the resumes are not correct, they'll be fired. I asked John Mackey one time, the founder of Whole Foods, a dear friend, why are your people so friendly when you go to Whole Foods? He said, well, when they apply, we put them all in a room, and the ones that get up and start talking to people and interacting with people, those are the ones that we hire. We don't hire the ones who just sit there and do nothing. So I think that the human element is very, very interesting. But on the other hand, a lot of this stuff, a lot of the jobs are just stay-at-home jobs. They're doing what we do now.
Sure.
It's going to be interesting.
Nick, I have a question for you. In listening to folks like Jeff Bezos and Satya Nadella from Microsoft and all the other Mark Zuckerberg of Meta, and they have been recently interviewed and inquire about how much of their code that they write every day is coming from AI versus humans. And the number is kind of staggering to me, as high as 40% by some of them. What are your thoughts of that? And will the programmer job disappear, or what's going on there?
Yeah, I love this question. I actually blogged about this question not too long ago. So, it's called vibe coding. That's the word for it nowadays. As I just turned to my LLM, and I don't have a software engineering or computer science degree. I let it code, right? So even at our company, we've got some of this, right? We get some auto-generated code. It cuts down on time. The way that I would answer it is this way. AI is really good at generating independent single applications at a reasonable scale that a single application can run. It's very bad at scaling out to a multifunction auto distributed system. It
Mhm.
just cannot, it's not good enough to catch the corner cases of a human behavior and how it's going to interact with a truly scalable system. Now, when I say scalable, like a very complex scalable distributed system, I talk about our company too, search. Search right now, its biggest problem is it requires so much infrastructure to run. And typically the infrastructure it's running is still very steady state. I mean, think of Google and its data centers and its replicating indexes, and these things run statically, like they're dynamic, right? But they're always on, right? I mean, we talk about how this just impacts the digital footprint, and the carbon footprint on our Earth is massive from these kinds of things. And so the shift in this industry is to try to move more towards that microsystem design. Pick your favorite buzzword. It's all kind of the same as how do we do more with less compute? And so this kind of problem statement is very difficult for an AI to automate the code to do something like that. And so when I hear Zuckerberg say 40% of our code, I believe it because a lot of engineers like to rewrite linked lists over and over and over again, right? Like, and so if I have an AI rewrite a linked list for me, great, and that contributes to that 40%. And a lot of the tens of thousands of lines of code are just give me a distributed hash table, give me this. These are data structures we learn in CS1, CS2, CS3. We recode them just to get our brain around them. And AI can do that all day. And I would gladly rather pay an AI or not pay an AI to do that for me, and then take the computer science brains, which are different from the software engineering brains, mind you. I do draw a line of what a computer scientist really is and then a software engineer. And both are extremely valuable, but I'd rather put the computer science brain and the software engineer on the distributed system and the science behind it of how to truly start bringing the compute power down so that we can focus on the real problems like reducing the carbon footprint, things like that. So I think that AI is going to take those, just like everything else, it's going to take those jobs that are good to automate, and then we can shift the human capital over to the much more critical problems that is an AI is going to either drop the ball on or cause misinformation on, and that includes coding, big distributed
So I
system coding.
wonder, before these guys jump into this line of questioning, if it is always thought that innovation helps the next generation. But I'm wondering if the notion of a prompt engineer, which means you require deep knowledge, domain, historical knowledge, experience. So I wonder if somebody like Llewellyn King, who everybody should aspire to be like, or John C.B. Butler, somebody who people should aspire to be like. And they're not programming anything anymore, but they have an immense amount of knowledge and understanding and historical experience. What if we could spend an hour training them to deal with AI bots? And would John Butler and Llewellyn King come up with revolutionary solutions and programs by asking the right question to the bot? What do you think, Nick?
Absolutely. I think this is the new job it creates, the new opportunity. And I think there was always the whole can't teach an old dog new tricks or something. It was like, no, or I coded in Ada. I'm not going to be useful in this. No, I think this industry and what AI is really doing is allowing the experienced minds to be used in ways that haven't been they've been used, right? But really use them in very critical spaces like that. Combat the misinformation. Really teach and train these as if they are, newborns, and help set that course on the right path. That's my personal thoughts.
Yeah, Johnny.
Well, I think we've always said that one of the things about downsizing on the basis of age was that institutional knowledge was lost. And what you're asking is, I mean, when we capture the institutional knowledge of a Llewellyn King, that cannot be captured by the computer system itself. So one of the great problems in the downsizing era is that when you did it by age, you lost most of your institutional knowledge, your institutional history. You sit around a table and people would bring up things that were solved 20 and 30 years ago. So I think that one of the great things I thought about with AI is to do that. So at one time, that is before computers, I would call Howard Becker from Northwestern University and say, Howard, what should I be reading now? What's the best things in the journals now? Well, I don't have to do that anymore. I can just sit down and pull up everything and ask, what are the articles on occupational therapy or whatever the case might be. Now, can you imagine with me a company that would store all of its institutional knowledge?
Mhm.
Institutional knowledge from engineers, institutional knowledge from board of directors, questions that were asked that made the companies great. Because one thing I have learned being on so many boards and creating at least 4 companies is that the decisions that you make around the table will determine the future. So we've always had the notion that, hey, history is repeating itself. I'm sure Llewellyn King is sitting there looking at the morning news and said, man, I have seen this before hundreds of times. So it's the same kind of problem solving that we have in the business world. And this is why in the old days, we brought in the gray-haired people. Perhaps the gray-haired people will be digital now. And so I think that is a great concept.
Yeah, Llewellyn,
Oh,
you're muted. You're muted. You're muted.
I think thank you for the flattery. It's an interesting concept, but it's flawed. And that is the great challenge of AI at the moment, from my point of view, is veracity. Are these the facts, or are they inaccurate? And I often look at things I know something about, and AI's version of it is inaccurate. If you start asking people and take that as a correct interpretation of something, you're going to institutionalize errors. It's a large problem just in history. Historians have great difficulty deciding what actually happened, which is why you can have Marxist historians, conservative historians. It's a precast to looking at it. And one of the great challenges, I'm so glad Nick touched on this, is going to be going forward, establishing the provenance and the veracity of anything on the web that comes from AI. I'd like to go very quickly back to Nick's and my discussion about who's going to pay. There's a danger if you go to the subscription model. It tends to be elitist. The poor will not be able to afford it. And you will lose a lot of users. What we've found with paywalls in publishing is thousands of people are immediately out of the picture. They're not going to pay. And you're asked to pay. In this household, we pay for about 12 subscriptions, spend a lot of money on different magazines and newspapers. It's maybe more than 12. Somehow I think these companies, certainly this has been the case with companies like Meta, want everybody to use their service. If they go to a paywall, they reduce the number of people. I think that possibly the way to go forward is more a pay per use, which would not exclude people. It would still exclude those who had no money whatsoever, but a pay per use, a kind of Uberization in which you pay for what you want, might be something they would consider. But at some point, it's going to be a challenge. They're not going to put money into developing AI for decades without getting some financial return. Their stockholders alone will not put up with it. It's a fascinating business challenge, I think.
Nick, let's wrap up things. I want to come back to your company. Tell us maybe one example of a customer that is very promising and happy using your solution, and what's next, the next 6 months for the company.
Yeah. Yeah, one of the customers that's really happy using our solution is on the government side. We've got a pretty large deployment in a highly secure environment, and air gap environment where they can't connect to any cloud at all, but they have their own private private servers and on private cloud that they're running. And that's actually a sweet spot for us that we operate very well in. We're getting full authority to operate on the high side networks. And so compliance and all of that is getting assessed and getting all the approvals and certifications, all the fun stuff that goes along with that. And what's on the horizon for us is really truly moving towards, this will touch on what the point that Llewellyn just made is the elitist right now is very true. Unless you have open source companies, open core companies coming in to challenge that and giving alternatives in a true capitalistic competition model that are far cheaper and driving those elitist prices down. And that's really where we love to be, is in that disruptive space. And that's where I'll call to attention, it really takes a large amount of compute time to develop the LLM. But once that LLM is developed, this is where it lives, can run on your home computer. Heck, there's a TI-84 calculator version of some of this. So the actual compute for the LLM that's created is not too terribly pricey. It's just who can create it. And I think there's large strides being made in the open source industry, or open source world right now, where people are actually able to create LLMs on a $5,000 server class computer in their home. And so this is where we love to live. This is the kind of disruption we like to help out with, work with the open source community to try to bring those prices down and drive this away from the tight grip of those large cloud companies.
Gentlemen, final thoughts.
I'd like to ask Nick as a final question, what does he think of the imminent arrival of general computing when we get away from large language model? And will that impact your company, and how will it impact the rest of us?
I think it will impact our company from the perspective of just making sure that, hardware changes all the time. And so we are trying to develop with future proofing as much as we possibly can. But I think it is going to impact us to in the sense that we're going to have to gut some things, throw some things away. I actually think that this is probably the biggest challenge for a company and probably the biggest differentiator for companies that live long term or die quickly is just the ability to adapt and identify what they need to toss. So we try to keep our forward thought thinking as much as we possibly can, but I do think there'll be fallout and some casualties as that that rises.
Mm-hmm. Well, let us not forget about the old free business model. From newspapers and television, where you give the content away free, and of course, and then you get advertising money. The free business model has been dynamic with Facebook, and because the thing about software is that it's there forever. You can improve it, and now that we have self-improving software, we don't have to go back and recode. It is learning itself, like the old regression model in SPSS, right? Which was the first learning model to me, right? And it was trying to fit a curve, right? Fit the data to a curve. So I don't think you forget about the free model. And the free model, I don't know where it is now. I don't know if it's oversaturated now. And but they gave newspapers away for many, many years and collected money from the advertisers. They gave television content away many, many years and collected from the advertisers. And there's no need just to log on and pay a subscription. Maybe the free model should be brought back in a great atmosphere where everybody is charging to log on. But I do think that it's a learning experience, and I think that in 10 years, we'll talk about AI like we talk about flight and television and the ability to repaginate, which I think is the most dynamic thing that ever happened, where you don't have to go back and type everything over. You can just repaginate, if you will. So you're in a good area. The cloud stuff, I think, is there. I think you'll see a return to, from the mainframe in the future as the more expensive it gets. And I think you'll see quote cloud computing among housing kinds of neighborhoods. And because our biggest issue now with the cloud, of course, is the cost of We got a lot of interesting challenges, but we always had a lot of interesting challenges. And that's what makes it so interesting. We have the ability to think about the future and to solve the future.
Gentlemen, very interesting. Nick, your final thoughts as we part ways, and we want to thank you for being with us. But any final wisdom, and we'll sure have you back.
Oh, absolutely. Final thoughts would be that I think that we shouldn't stop thinking critically. I actually had just noticed there was a question out on the Q&A here on some things that Llewellyn and I were talking about on the misinformation side of things of LLMs regurgitating. So my final thoughts of wisdom are don't ever forget that, and don't take the response of LLM as being 100% accurate. And I think as long as we continue to think critically and we continue to fact check the best we can and cross-reference, I mean, this is the foundation of academia and peer-reviewed journals, is that they are built on shoulders and they're peer-reviewed with good references, with peer-reviewed references. So let's do the same with these LLMs, not take them at face value, and just continue to propagate the misinformation. So I appreciate John Howe's that question coming in.
Absolutely.
Johnny, take us
Really
away.
fascinating, Nick. Thank you very much indeed.
Thank you. Thank you all for your time.
Where have all the flowers gone? Long time passing. Where have all the flowers gone? Long time ago. Where have all the flowers gone? Gone to graveyards one by one. When will they ever learn? When will they ever learn? Where have all the young girls gone? Long time passing. When will they ever learn? When will they ever learn?
Thank you, Johnny.
Yeah.
Thank you, Nick. All the
Thank you
best.
all.
Thank you, Llewellyn.
Anytime.
Bye,
Enjoyed it.
guys.
Take care.